In this video, I will teach you a very simple strategy you can use to win more chess games. And although it is simple to understand, it can be difficult to execute correctly. So I will demonstrate how to do this in a chess game against chessbot Lee. I will be playing the Queen's Gambit because I got a message from FE2 Daggers and our Chess Improvers community asking me, can I play the Queen's Gambit since you told us in the previous video that you don't like dubious gambits? Well, of course, nothing wrong with the Queen's Gambit. So our opponent takes the pawn, that's fine. The first thing we need to focus on for this strategy is to set up a very solid center. That is the first goal. After we have a very solid center, we will make sure that all of our pieces are in the most aggressive positions to set up an attack on our enemy king. And then I will demonstrate you how to set up a professional attack. We're not going to sacrifice meaninglessly if it doesn't work or play overly aggressive moves. First things first, we need to decide what we are going to play here. Multiple options. I will not play pawn to e4 because it leads to pawn e5 and I don't want to go into that theory specifically here for the sake of this video. So I will just play knight to c3, developing a knight, also guarding this b5 square to prevent black from easily defending this. My opponent playing a little bit of a strange move, I think, at least knight to c6, because this always allows us to push, but I don't want to overly push in the center. I already have this pawn here in the center. That is fine. I'm actually just going to develop this knight for now and just see what my opponent plays. All right, they also play knight to f6. Now we have to choose, and this is a very important moment. We can either think about moving this bishop, playing pawn to e3, or playing pawn to e4. So what is the best plan here? Well, if we push pawn to e3, the big advantage, of course, is that we are allowing this bishop to recapture. And of course, this is a very good place to be for the bishop, a very good square, since we will be attacking this f7 pawn. Only problem, of course, is that we block in our dark squared bishop. So this one is probably going to be passive for quite a while, unless if we play something here, but it's not clear where this bishop is going to go. We can also play pawn to e4, which I think makes a lot of sense. Then we basically have the center, we have the two knights. I don't really fear anything here, and if black tries this counterattack, we can always push. You could also think, well, I'm going to move my bishop. So for example, playing bishop to g5 or playing bishop to f4, a little bit of a London-like system. But our main goal is to position all of our pieces so that they can attack the enemy king side. So we want to position all of our pieces so that they can inflict some damage here on this side of the board. So what would be the best move? In my opinion, e3 would not be the best move because, well, simply we are blocking in our bishop. The best move would probably be e4 or maybe even playing this bishop to g5, since we can eliminate this knight, which is an important defensive piece. What is the best move? I am going to say this one because it is the most flexible option. Now we just have a very solid center. White is trying to pin our knight. We have to always be careful whenever our opponent makes a move. They are eliminating basically a defender from this d4 pawn. So we can do a bunch of things. Of course, it would be a mistake to just attack this and then trade and then at the end of the day lose this. And even if you take with the pawn, you are still losing this. So we don't want that to happen. So we have to make sure that this is safe. The knight is defended anyways. So what is the best move? We can expand in the center or we can develop our bishop. I think it's better to develop the bishop here. I know we are not immediately attacking the king side, but we also have to be patient. Being patient is very important for this strategy to work. And now we can take here on c4. Black really trying to pin all of the knights here with the second pin. All right, not that I am really worried about this, but of course after every move our opponent makes, we do a quick check, and now we realize that our central pawn on e4 is no longer protected. So we have to protect this with queen to d3 or queen to c2, but I think queen to d3 is a very interesting move. Our opponent might always take on f3, and I think that probably looks scary. For some of you, this idea that they might take, but it actually doesn't matter too much because this would open up a line for attack. So if this happens, I will gladly play this. So I don't mind. We're going to see if they actually take this. All right, so they do take this. This is going to be a bit more high level than I thought it would be, but it is fine. Why do I not mind this structure? Well, everything we want to do is activate pieces and make sure that we can attack the enemy king side. That's what I told you at the beginning. Well, we already have 3 pieces here, and now we just have this G file as well. So since we want to attack, this is not a bad position. Opponent playing pawn to e5, trying to disrupt our center. I think probably the easiest thing to do is just push. We still have a very solid center and they have to move the knight. Okay, now it's time to start our attack because we have already developed all of these pieces. We do have a very strong center. Those are the first 2 things we need to focus on, getting a strong center and also developing all of our pieces. I don't mind if black wants to exchange. They are just wasting time at the end of the day. Before we start an attack, I am going to do one more thing, I think, and that might be castling. Although I am not 100% sure we actually do need to castle here. We can castle first and then start attacking. Yeah, I think in general it's probably best to castle first and then attack. Just because we want to be safe. We want to have a very solid center, well-developed pieces, and also a safe king. And now is the time for attacking. So how can we attack this king? Well, this particular structure that you can see here, this exact structure, is something you will get very often. And this is almost indestructible because there are no pawn weaknesses and the knight is here as a defender. So we will have to do something about this. We have to either eliminate the knight or try to force one of those pawns to move so that we can create some weaknesses. Because of the way we developed our pieces, I already see some interesting options. For example, here, this bishop might be pinning this pawn in the future if we ever choose to move this. Because we did this exact capture, we can also swing rooks over and start attacking here. Plus, we can also start pushing with the pawn. What is better? Is it better to attack with this rook or is it better to attack with this rook? I think it's about equal, honestly. The only thing that is maybe that can maybe be said about this rook is that now we have 2 rooks active and this one can support this h pawn push. So that's why I'm gonna play rook to g1. Okay, our opponent of course has to try and counterattack as well here on the king side, but yeah, on the queen side, but it's gonna be quite a slow attack because their own pieces are basically blocking the attack. a6 doesn't really do anything. I mean, it's gonna be a while before black can attack. So how can we keep attacking here? Well, it's like I said, we want to create a weakness. Right now we already have the rook active and we have a very simple threat that we can play. And I hope you can see this. And that is we can play bishop to h6. This is a very common mistake actually at the beginner level as well. And why is this so strong? Well, of course, if they push, they are dropping the rook. Plus they create the weaknesses that we wanted. And if they move the rook, of course, now we just have a rook and bishop team up and we can do tactics. You can also take with the rook, but it's a little bit better to take with the bishop. Interesting move choice by our opponent here, playing the knight back. So we are following all of our rules. We have a very solid center, we have well-developed pieces, and now we are trying to attack, but we only want to play moves of which we are 100% certain that they work. Okay, so how are we going to continue here? First of all, we did accomplish one thing. We were able to make this knight move. So that means there's already one less defender here. Not that it matters straight away. One question is also, can we do something here? Because you can imagine that if we take this with the bishop or the rook, and they recapture with the knight most likely, we might be able to just pin it with our second rook and then try to start an attack. And it is very important if you want to play this style of chess, this attacking style of chess, that you are patient. You build the center first, you build up your king safety first, then you attack, but you also need to be willing to calculate if there is an opportunity. So we need to calculate if we take this with the bishop. First of all, that looks like a potentially good move because the rook would be trapped and we would be having discovery checks. But if they take with the knight, what can we do exactly? We can maybe pin it with a second rook, but the rook will be all by itself, pinning it, and we don't really have any way to attack the knight. So I don't really see a benefit. We also have to calculate it in the different move order. What if we sack the rook with a check? They take with the knight, and then we play our rook here. Well, now we actually still have our bishop and rook working together. So that seems to me a little bit more interesting. In this particular move order, I'm going to demonstrate this as well. You could also say, well, maybe you can try to double up your rook. That is true, but they can just get the king out of dodge, and then once we double up, they can move the knight. In this variation that I am calculating, where we do this, this, and this, of course, if they just simply move the king, now we can take this with a check. So I did some calculation, and I am 100% sure that this sacrifice will work. So that is why I am going to play this. Never play a sacrifice if your calculation didn't reveal that it is going to play. Unless if you want to play for tricks, but I in general don't recommend that type of chess. So now we are just going to pin this knight. And you can see suddenly this super strong fortress structure that my opponent had is already crumbling. Right now the rook is working here with the bishop. These pawns are weak. And black is taking this knight. There are two things we can do basically here. We can either recapture the bishop, that's fine. But also we do have an attack going on here, as you can see. So I'm not 100% sure if we have to respond to this opponent's threat. Because oftentimes when you are attacking, you just want to keep attacking and you shouldn't really care too much about what your opponent is doing. Our king is still safe here, so not much going on. Can we recapture this bishop? Yeah, I think we perfectly can. And even if they try to go for more exchanges, yeah, nothing's really going on. Can we continue our attack? I think we can also continue our attack probably here. It depends a little bit how much time you have left to calculate everything. Are you gonna take or are you gonna recapture this? What I am personally gonna do is I will capture this bishop because I do think there might be some damage done if they sacrifice the bishop any further. My opponent here trying to play queen to f6. I already calculated this quickly without mentioning it. And of course this doesn't really work because we can take here and then yeah, the queen would just be pinning herself if they recapture. They can give me one check, but of course king to b1, and now our king is safe as well. Very interesting choice here by black, trying to attack the rook. So I hope you realize we have a bunch of tricks. We can, for example, move the bishop and give a check, but none of these tricks work because we're always losing our rook. So how can we solve this? Well, if we just protect our rook, all of these tricks will be possible. So a very simple move like queen to c1 is a good move here. And okay, they sacrifice the queen. Of course, if they don't sacrifice the queen, it's also going to be checkmate. And now this should be easy because that's a discovered check. The king moves, that's another check. And I think this should be about checkmate. Yep. To further demonstrate a strategy, I will be playing a second game in the Queen's Gambit against the Libot. And this time she played this pawn to c6, the Slav defense. So we are just going to continue with the same plan as always. We want to develop all of the pieces first and make sure we have a very good grip over this center. She does end up here at, after all, accepting this pawn. We do have to be careful here. This is of course a little bit of Queen's Gambit theory. If we just move one of our pawns, they will play this and basically have a free pawn. The way to prevent this, the best way is to push pawn to a4. And in general, I am not a huge fan of pushing pawns, especially if it's not in the center. But if there is a very good reason to push a particular pawn, of course, you shouldn't hesitate and you should play it. Especially this a pawn is a little bit of an exception to all of the other pawns, because this grabs space on the queen side and also takes away this square. So now, basically this option of holding on to the pawn is no longer possible. Black is playing a smart move here with bishop f5 because I would love, of course, to grab the center as we have done before. But it's not going to be possible because, well, they can take with the bishop or they can take with the knight. So we have to continue. I want to continue development, of course. e4 is not possible. So I can choose. I can either develop my bishop and attack this knight, or I can play pawn to e3. But in this particular position, since we have already created some weaknesses here on the queen side, it's not so smart to leave with our bishop and leave everything here unprotected. For example, queen b6, and sometimes it can be a little bit annoying. So I'm gonna be patient, always very important. Be patient, we might be able to activate this bishop in the future. So let's just keep it here on this c1 square. Black pinning the knight, which increases their control over this square here on e4. So how are we going to continue? I'm going to analyze a little bit with you. We can just castle, that's fine. We already have a center and develop pieces, so we can castle. You can also think about other moves. Something like bishop d2, many players play this. I don't really like it because there's no real point in playing this. At the end of the day, if I just castle, for example, and they take this, I'm never worried. Basically, we just reinforce our center. So I'm going to continue with the same strategy. We develop the pieces. Now we are going to castle. And now that we have castled, it is time for us to see if we can try to start an attack. There are a couple of interesting ideas that we have here. One idea is to play knight h4 and attack this bishop. With the main goal, of course, if they move back, that we are taking this. And every single change that we can create in this structure, this is the most solid structure. If we can change this in any way, even if it's just moving the pawn there, that will increase our chances of launching a successful attack. So knight h4 might be possible, but it can get tricky. For example, what happens if they play bishop here? We might have to push the pawn, and this is all getting very complicated. So let's just not go for that. But I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad move. I also want to further activate my pieces, mainly this bishop, but it's not really doing anything. Plus, of course, also my queen. One thing that we would love to play is at some point e4, e5. e4, e5, we always need to control the center first before we can attack. So that would be a good idea. One move that might potentially help with this, what I'm going to play here is playing queen to e2. It protects the bishop and it also makes this e4 push possible. So now we can push e4 in the center, and that is exactly what I wanted to play, something like this. One thing that I really think is a very smart strategy is trying to get a pawn to e5. If you have good control over the center, a pawn on e5 will really help you. Why is that the case? Pawns on e5 will always kick away this enemy knight. And if this knight moves, for example, if it moves here, one of the key defenders here on the king side has been removed. The only thing I have to calculate a little bit here is there some way they could try to play for tricks? For example, going here, but our knight is no longer pinned, so we can just grab it. Also, I need to think, what if they go to the central square and maybe attack our knight twice? But it probably doesn't matter too much either. One thing we can also do is be a little bit patient and not push this straight away, because there's no real reason to push right now. We can also push on the next move. And we can play another move to increase our position. Bishop here pins the knight to the queen, but I'm not really sure if this is going to work, for example, after they play this, and then at the end of the day they are winning this pawn. So we have some issues here. So we have a bunch of plans. We want to push e5, that's fine, but I don't want to be impatient, so I'm going to wait a little bit. I would also like to pin this knight, but then we are losing this pawn. So how can we make everything possible at the same time? A very smart move here is to realize that this bishop might also be useful here. And we shouldn't be afraid of moving the same piece twice in the middle game if we are improving its position. And now that this is protected, of course my opponent immediately saw this, it's a high level bot. They play h6, because if they play any other move, of course, they would in many lines just be allowing me to pin this knight, maybe even win it if I can push pawn to e5. So my opponent not taking any chances, they push the pawn. But that makes me happy, because every single time that something changes about the structure, a new weakness has been created. And now we have this weakness here on h6 and we can potentially attack this. How are we going to continue? Well, of course, we want to keep improving our position first. Can I play e5? Yep, I can always play e5. But I'm also inviting a bunch of exchanges. And if there's one thing that we don't want, it's exchanging too many pieces, because that will limit our opportunity for attack. So we're just going to keep this for now. We always have this threat if we want to play it later. What can we do? We can still improve a piece. We still have a piece that's completely useless right now. And we cannot play it to g5, but we can still play it to f4. And you can see how active all of these pieces are. All of them are working together. Black immediately attacks us. How do we respond to this? My recommendation is do not go here. of course, because you are allowing them to take, and now we are the ones with a bad structure. So I am just going to move this. I can move it to e3, I think, and then I just protect my central pawn as well. And my opponent here playing a5, a little bit of a useless move. Those are the moves I really don't like. Randomly pushing pawns because they are out of strategy. They don't have a single plan. Good, I think we have one of the most excellent structures we could have potentially had to demonstrate this. Both bishops and the queen active. We also have a knight on this side of the board. We are controlling the center, and we have the castled king and the still perfectly safe kingside position. So now the only question is, how can we attack and how can we win here? Alright, what are the weaknesses in my opponent's camp? First of all, what is this knight doing here on the edge of the board? I am not too sure that this is actually a smart move. The knight might have to go back here in the future, and we can potentially play e5 and some line. Not in this exact line, I think, because again, we are inviting a bunch of trades as well. But we might in some line, as you can see, be able to trap the knight. Black can maybe play some crazy moves, try to go back here. But it's just good to realize that this is a potential weakness. Sacrificing the bishop on h6 is of course also interesting. Not here because there's still way too many defenders, but this could be one of the ways in a future tactic where we open this up. But we would have to have a queen active somewhere, right? So this knight is blocking us. So we already identified plan 1, plan 2 with the queen. We also have plan 3 that we want to get one of our pawns here to e5. So we already have a couple of plans. How can we combine all of this? Well, if we move our knight, we are activating our queen. So that's going to help. And if we move our knight here, we are threatening to again weaken the pawn structure. We're also attacking the defender of this knight, and we are opening up our queen. So I think that looks like one of the best moves possibly. If they take, which of course is possible, I don't mind at all, because now even though we have the doubled pawns, these are incredibly strong pawns because they are taking away this e5, this f6 square from the knight because it's on e5. A bit strange here by my opponent playing the king out. I'm not too sure why they play this, but at the same time, black is pretty much already losing no matter what, because we just have the best structure. Our plans are still here. We can sacrifice, but of course it's not gonna work. Yeah, they can just take this, but it's still good to have this idea in mind. This bishop is currently dead, not really doing anything. Alright, not a problem, we're just gonna keep it here for now. Maybe it might be able to participate in the future, like this. Or we can also move it out of the way, so that we can activate our rook onto this queen. But I'm also looking at this knight. I hope you realize that my opponent made a little bit of a problem here. They basically trapped their own knight in a way, because it cannot really go anywhere. So even a crazy move like pawn to g4 might be interesting, because the knight cannot really go anywhere. We always have to be careful though for our opponent's moves as well. Maybe they can try to go in with the queen. We can capture this. We get our queen attacked. Our queen has to move, and then all of a sudden we are the ones that might get checkmated. So I'm not saying this tactic doesn't work. If you have a lot of time, you can calculate, but it's also a little bit of a dangerous thing to play if you are uncertain, and especially with this queen still present. One other move which I think is incredibly interesting is pushing pawn to f4, because we are expanding on this side of the board. We are opening up more pieces, and we're also activating our rook for the attack. So that is the move I am going to play. This is a very useful pawn move. So the opponent playing pawn to f5. We can do a bunch of things. We can take en passant, but we will also of course be reactivating this knight. So we don't want to play that. We can also take here, and that would be good for us because this bishop, which was previously dead, is now all of a sudden active. I don't see any immediate win straight away, but we can just play this and it is fine. How can we continue here? Very interesting. My opponent's kingside position is basically about to collapse. But this knight is still hanging on somehow. It's still not completely dead. I don't see any immediate way to make progress here. I think the bishop is stuck currently. This bishop is stuck. The queen is not really doing anything. So there are basically two things we can do when you come to a moment like this. One thing you can do is to realize, okay, I might not have a winning attack. might just be the case that I don't have a winning attack. And yeah, is that necessarily the worst thing in the world? Not always. We can just continue with a move like rook to d1, and we can still play some good chess. We can still play for the center. We have a good square here. We can maybe put a piece there. Also, we have very flexible pieces. We can switch our attack onto the queen side as well. But sometimes there are ways to force a win with crazy moves. And one thing I am thinking of here is this plan that we have had with g4. Does it work? But it's going to involve some calculation. Because if I play this and they take, we get this. Check, check, check. King has to move, and then we win the knight. So that is why I am thinking of this line. But I'm not sure if there is anything else, because first of all, they don't need to take, but if they don't take and they move the knight is trapped. So it's a pretty forcing line. They will probably have to take, and if they do, we are certain that this is a check. We can play this. Our king is also not super safe, but we can always slide it here to the corner. So I don't really see any problem. Quickly checking if there's something, but if they take somewhere else, we basically just set up the threat again. Of course, if they play something crazy, we just get a queen. Yeah, I really, maybe they can sacrifice here as well, but then probably just bishop or rook. So I think we finally found a winning plan. If you don't find this in your own games, it's probably because you need to do a little bit more tactics, a little bit more pattern recognition. But here we just have a free piece. It's interesting defense by queen h5, but it doesn't really help since we can basically take. Yes, they can take with the bishop, but we can just move our queen. And I'm gonna put it here because now I am 100% sure that everything is safe. And basically we are already up a piece again because of this strategy. All that's left to do is to try and win the game. What can we do exactly? We have to, of course, make sure we don't run into troubles. This is not a good move. We would be losing our piece. Maybe bishop to e2 makes sense. It's just proposing a trade. And in general, when you are up material, one of the best things to do is trade, because the more we trade, the easier things are gonna get. And you don't always need to have a winning attack. And with that, I mean a checkmating attack. Sometimes it's just good enough to win a piece and then trade into the endgame. I am gonna play king h1 here because I can feel that my opponent might have some counter. And now at least I have my king in the corner and I can also start attacking. We do have to be always worried a little bit about this diagonal opening up and maybe getting a check, but we can always slide the queen there if we need to. And black is doing the thing that they shouldn't do, and they are opening up more lines towards their enemy king. So it might be easy. This check, we expected this. We're gonna activate the queen. They take, and now I'm gonna trade queens. Why do I trade queens? Of course, less pieces is easier for us. And now this is just a bishop up endgame, and I think we might even have some type of checkmate here. For example, here a rook, and yeah, of course, I almost didn't see it, but of course the bishop is also participating. So that is a checkmate. Alright, so I hope you will be able to use this strategy in your own games. Please remember, make sure you have a very good control over the center. Make sure your king is safe. Try to keep improving your pieces in the most aggressive positions. Don't be overly pushy, don't overextend, don't create weaknesses. And at the end, your opponent will crack, they will make a mistake, they might self-destruct, and you are just gonna win the game. That's it, I'll see you in another video, bye!